Hello, everyone. Welcome. We'll start the webinar very soon. So people are coming in. So we are expecting to have around like 30 participants today. So yes, welcome. All right. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the webinar of EAAFP Youth Think Tank Competition second workshop series. My name is Yoon Lee. I'm the External Relations Manager at the EAAFP Secretariat, and I will be a moderator of today's webinar for an hour. Before we start, I would like to share a few housekeeping rules. Please mute your microphone unless you are invited to speak. Please use the chat box for questions and comments. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. So if you do not wish to appear in the recording, you may turn off your video. 2 years ago, in November 2020, the East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership and Youth Engaged in Wetlands, YEW, organized the first ever Flyway Youth Forum to connect, empower, and provide a platform for dialogue for future youth leaders, focusing conservation of wetlands and migratory waterbirds in and beyond the East Asian Australasian Flyway. To continue the vision from the 2020 Flyway Youth Forum, the EAAFP Secretariat launched the Youth Think Tank competition for EAA Flyway in November last year. 5 projects were selected, and it's being implemented until October this year. As part of the think tank competition, we started a training workshop for the youth in the Flyway. Following the successful organization of the first training workshop in November last year, today the EAP Secretariat is excited to host its second training workshop with the topic of local community engagement in conservation of migratory waterbirds at wetlands. Now, let me introduce our guest speakers of today. First, I'm very pleased to introduce our keynote speakers, Ms. Kathryn Bimson. Ms. Kathryn Bimson is the Program Officer for Water, Wetlands, and Nature-Based Solutions for Climate at the IUCN Asia Regional Office. She has been working on wetlands in Southeast Asia for the last 9 years and is currently coordinating the regional implementation of a number of projects related to nature-based solutions at wetlands in the Lower Mekong Basin. Ms. Bimson also supports the Secretariat for the Indo-Burma Ramsar Regional Initiative, working closely with the governments of Cambodia, Laos PDR, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam to strengthen the implementation of the Ramsar Convention in the region. Ms. Bimson holds a Master's of Science in Biology from the Prince of Songkhla University in Thailand, and a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Fairfield University from the United States. She previously received a National Geographic Young Explorers Grant to study private sector engagement in coral reef restoration and spent her first year in Thailand as an English teaching assistant with the US Fulbright program. We are very happy to have Kathryn, and audience, please note that during her presentation, please leave your question in the chat box and we will address your questions during the Q&A after the second speaker. Now, please welcome Kathryn Bimson. Kathryn, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I hope everyone can see my screen. Can you confirm
Yes.
that? Perfect. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words of introduction. I'm really happy to be here to discuss and share a bit more about IUCN's work on nature-based solutions, and particularly our work in wetlands, because wetlands, as we all know, are really valuable ecosystems. And there's a lot of ways that we can use wetlands, we can manage, restore wetlands to provide benefits to both biodiversity and to people. So before we get into too much detail on nature-based solutions, just to make sure we're all on the same page, wanted to provide a brief overview of the definition of wetlands according to the Ramsar Convention. So wetlands are incredibly diverse, as we know, and they can be inland ecosystems like rivers and lakes, which we have many of in the Asia region. And they can also be coastal wetlands. So often the first one people think of is mangroves, but also coral reefs, which I did a lot of work on in Thailand, seagrass beds, tidal flats, really, really diverse, unique ecosystems that have a lot of biodiversity and a lot of value to local communities, supporting livelihoods and supporting fisheries. And then we also have human-made wetlands. So in the Asia region, in particular, rice fields are one of the most common, but also fish ponds and aquaculture, and these areas that really help to sustain local livelihoods. So wetlands are very diverse, and because of that diversity, they provide a huge range of ecosystem services. So ecosystem services are services that are provided by the environment to people that we think of as kind of free of charge. Sometimes we don't even think about these services that are being provided, but they're essential. And once these ecosystems disappear, humans feel the impact immediately. So when we talk about wetlands, we can think of coastal wetlands like mangroves and coral reefs that defend us from strong storms. They also sequester a lot of carbon. They also act as really essential nurseries for fish and shellfish that people depend on for food and people depend on for their livelihoods. And then if we look more at inland wetlands, we can think about rivers as a means of moving goods from one place to another and how they help communities to navigate around. And they also have a very tangible spiritual element as well. So we can think of the value of water, wetlands, rivers in a lot of communities and religious ceremonies. So another kind of ecosystem service that isn't always talked about. Of course, inland wetlands also provide water provision. Wetlands act as giant sponges that help to absorb water and release it in the dry season, so providing water all year round. And they also help to purify water and regulate these floods. So a huge range of services provided by the wetlands. And they can be used to address societal challenges that we're facing. So societal challenges range from just any problem we're facing, whether it's the impacts of climate change, increased temperatures, stronger storms, changes in rainfall patterns, also food security. If we have these changes in climate, how is that affecting the food that we eat and how is it affecting our access to food? Of course, wetlands are key in securing water for people, whether that's in areas that have too much water or not enough water. They also help in temperature regulation. And looking at it in the view of the COVID-19 pandemic, healthy ecosystems help protect human health. So if we keep our ecosystems healthy, then they will provide these benefits of strengthening our human health and our resilience there. Of course, in wetlands, they're also important for socioeconomic development when we think of rice farming and agriculture, but also in terms of fisheries again. And they can help to reduce disaster risk, which is a very common nature-based solution that people often think of. So how do wetlands help us reduce floods, for example, or prevent drought? And finally, nature-based solutions can help address the ongoing issue of ecosystem degradation and biodiversity loss, which is a pressing issue in the Asia region. So before we go any further, I was asked to provide kind of an introduction to nature-based solutions. And I think one of the most important things when we talk about nature-based solutions is to talk about the definition itself. So the definition of nature-based solutions was adopted by IUCN members in 2016 at the World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. And the definition is long, but I think it's quite important to read, so I'll read it out. Nature-based solutions are defined as actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural or modified ecosystems that address societal challenges, such as those we just discussed on climate change, food and water security, or natural disasters, effectively and adaptively, simultaneously providing human well-being and biodiversity benefits. So the real key there is in the last bit. A lot of people say, okay, well, we've just made a dam, but we made it out of bamboo. So that's kind of a nature-based solution, but it's not. because that doesn't provide both human well-being and biodiversity benefits. These two things are key. When you think of a nature-based solution, you should be thinking, okay, it affects us, it helps us, but how does it affect biodiversity? How does it affect the birds that use this area? How does it affect the amphibians that use that wetland? So this is really key for the definition of nature-based solution. And because this word has been gaining popularity recently, there is a need to kind of further define and discuss the scope of nature-based solutions. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see nature-derived solutions. So nature-derived solutions are things that use nature, but don't necessarily provide those biodiversity benefits. So in that example, we can think of windmills. Are they beneficial to nature? In some ways, yes, because we're using them instead of burning fuel and fossil fuels, but they're not providing these biodiversity benefits. So they're not a nature-based solution. Then we can look at nature-inspired solutions. So this is examples like biomimicry, where we look at something in nature and we think, oh, maybe we can use that in engineering or designing a building. But it, again, does not provide those biodiversity benefits. And finally, we have nature-based solutions. So I'll talk a bit more about this example a little bit later on. But nature-based solutions, this is an example of a park in Bangkok where they've restored the park to mimic a wetland. So it's not returning it to its original state, but it's returning it to a more biodiverse area that provides increased benefits for biodiversity and for people. So nature-based solutions do not have to be standalone interventions. They can be part of a hybrid approach. So a good way to think about this, and I think a really strong example of this, is when we think about wastewater treatment. We, of course, need these first kind of gray infrastructure mechanisms to ensure that we're cleaning the waste enough before we let it out into the environment. But perhaps we can save some energy and some resources by, once we release it into the environment, developing an artificial wetland that can help to further filter the water and clean it before it's released into, let's say, the ocean or the marine habitat. So this is a perfect example of how we can combine the two and use the best of both of them to provide benefits for people. And when we think of nature-based solutions, we can look at it. I like this example because it really shows the application of nature-based solutions at scale. So there's a lot of work being done on nature-based solutions, but often it's at a very small scale and it doesn't address the whole problem. So when we think about wetlands, often we think about basin level. And this is an example on the left of a basin that is kind of following a business as usual approach here. You'll see there's some intensive agriculture farming. You'll see there's deforestation up high in the mountains. Along the river, there's some dikes that have been built, perhaps to reduce flooding during the rainy season. And then you see kind of an average city with a few trees here and there, and some aquaculture offshore, and some degraded mangroves. So business as usual. And then how can we apply nature-based solutions at that scale? So you'll see on the right, this is the ideal basin solution. Of course, you wouldn't be able to do probably all of this unless you had a very comprehensive plan. But this is an idea of what are the many things that can be done when we look at nature-based solutions, particularly for wetlands. So you can look at first restoring the forest high up in the mountains. That'll reduce runoff, reduce erosion, and of course, provide habitat for biodiversity. And then we can reconnect wetlands to the river so that the wetlands can serve that role as a natural sponge to absorb the floods when they come and release the water during the dry season. And this will reduce downstream flooding. So if we have these natural wetlands doing their job correctly, then we can remove the dikes from the river and we can let the rain come naturally. It will get naturally absorbed by the system and released by the system. There's also some agroforestry going on down lower in the basin. So again, looking at how do we ensure that we're not using monocrops and we're providing a variety of plants for pollinators and a variety of habitat for these animals that need it. In the city, they've made it more of a sponge city, more of a green city. So ensuring that there's areas where there's no concrete, where the city can absorb water, where there's plants that provide shade for people to sit under and for birds to build nests in, for example. And then further, when we look at more coastal wetlands, we can see restoration of mangroves and coral reefs to help reduce the strength of the waves coming in. So maybe you don't need as much reinforcement on the shore and coastal protection. and an ecosystem approach to fisheries management, ensuring that the fish that are there are protected enough so that they have enough time to regenerate, and there's restrictions in place to prevent people from catching those fish during the times that they're perhaps most vulnerable. So the way you could do that is to have a closed fishing season so that the broodstock have time to breed, and then opening the fishing season again with some regulations or limitations, making sure that people are only catching fish of a certain size and giving them that time to reproduce. So a really good example, this is one of my favorite diagrams of how you can switch from where we currently are to what we can eventually, hopefully do. And showing that a lot of that has to do with wetlands management. And of course, working with the communities. So I just wanted to share a few quick examples of what this looks like. So I talked about this park earlier, but Benjikiti Park is a brand new park in Bangkok. It's built next to an existing park that we have that is kind of the traditional park for Bangkok. So the traditional park has a big lake with a running track around the outside, and that's basically it. So very limited biodiversity in terms of plants and animals, kind of standard for people. You just walk around in a circle. But what they've done is they've bought a tract of land that is vacant now, and they've restored a wetland in that area. So this area of Bangkok was constantly plagued by floods. So they thought, if we make a wetland here, it will give space for the water to go when it rains in the rainy season. And it will also help in terms of temperature regulation when we think about the urban heat island effect. So this park was built and it was funded by the Australian Water Partnership, of course, very closely with the Bangkok Metro authorities. And the park has been a huge hit. It's very Instagrammable. So you see many young people around taking photos in the evening, but people like it just because it's different. It's different than the rest of the parks that we have in Bangkok. And a lot of people have said that it's really relaxing to go there. It feels like they're not in the city. So it's addressing this issue, the societal challenge, if you will, of human health, right? It's helping people's mental health. It's helping people escape from the city. But also with all of these different plants and islands and rivers and streams, it's really supporting biodiversity, especially in an urban area that has very limited space for biodiversity. So a perfect example of an urban nature-based solution and a really good public reaction to it. So switching from the urban to the much more coastal areas, this is one of the projects that IUCN is working on that my team and I are implementing in Ranong Ramsar site, or Krapari Estuary, Lamson Marine National Park, Krabi Estuary. So it's quite a large site. It's Thailand's largest Ramsar site. And it's a really unique area because it's the transboundary wetland between Thailand and Myanmar. It's got one of the biggest areas of mangroves in all of Thailand, but it doesn't have a management plan in place because it's quite a big area and it's quite difficult to manage properly. So what IUCN did with our colleagues at the Department of Natural Water Resources in Thailand was we worked to understand how is this site being affected by climate change. We worked with local communities to understand how climate change is affecting their livelihoods, specific species, like key species at the site, and key ecosystems at the site. And we looked at projections from now until the next 100 years to see how the site will change under climate change and what the biggest risks to the community are. And the biggest things we found were that increasing sea temperatures, increasing storm strength in the coastal areas is really affecting coral reefs. So coral reefs are bleaching, they're losing all of their color, they're dying because the water is simply too warm. And as we lose coral reefs, we lose that structure that all of the young fish hide in. So we lose a really important nursery and thus affect the local livelihoods of all of the fishermen who depend on them. We also found that increased erosion is threatening properties. Homes and land is falling into the ocean. And that's because there's a lot of water coming down because there's been so much reinforcement of concrete along the rivers. The water's coming down at a high speed and eroding riverbanks around the area. And there's also an increased intensity of storms, which is damaging roads, it's damaging homes, it's damaging community centers. And this is really affecting these people, of course. So what we're doing now is we're working with the community to develop a management plan with using nature-based solutions. So looking at these risks, thinking how can we best address these risks to the wetland, and how do we ensure that what we're doing is really what the community wants and what the community needs. So some of the ideas that the community has come up with are really focused around restoring mangroves and seagrass, again, to provide this nursery for young fish and to provide a buffer on the coast against storms. Looking at how do we reforest and do forest landscape restoration in upstream wetlands so that there's healthier forest and less runoff upstream, therefore slower water coming down during the rainy season and less erosion. And we're also working with them on promoting alternative livelihoods. So moving away from monocropping of examples of rubber and oil palm plantations and moving towards more agroforestry or more organic farming. So teaching the communities how to do this if they're interested and looking at how the impacts of switching from traditional farming to more organic farming, how that can affect the wetland with the less runoff, less fertilizer, and less negative impact on the wetland itself. So two examples that are quite different from Thailand, but you can see that there's a lot of options when it comes to nature-based solutions. And often we think about kind of the most traditional ones, we really think of forest landscape restoration or maybe mangrove planting, but there's a lot more that can be done. So with the growing interest in nature-based solutions, IUCN realized there was a gap that was needed. There was often nature-based solutions terms being thrown around for a lot of different interventions that do not provide these biodiversity benefits that I've mentioned. So we set about developing a global standard to ensure that what people call a nature-based solutions is in fact a nature-based solution. So the standard was developed with partners from around the world across 100 countries, and it was a number of open consultations with people to find out what they think is most important for making a nature-based solution, a true nature-based solution. So what we came up with was 8 criteria and 26 associated indicators under those criteria that really focus upon making sure that the ecosystem is well maintained and managed, and that the people who are impacted by the nature-based solution are involved in the process and benefit from the process. So the 8 criteria look at first at societal challenges. So what I've already discussed, what is the nature-based solution addressing? And is it addressing what we think it is? Second is on designing at scale, making sure we're not working at too small or too large of a scale, and ensuring that we're involving the stakeholders in that defined area and perhaps any other people who might be affected by it, for example, communities that are downstream from the intervention. We also looked at biodiversity net gain. Of course, nature-based solutions have to provide this biodiversity benefit, and we need to make sure we're monitoring that and ensuring that it's making a positive impact on biodiversity. Criteria 4 is on economic feasibility. So ensuring that the nature-based solution isn't too expensive, that when the funding stops or the project stops, that the nature-based solution will stop. So we want to make sure we have some kind of economic approach that allows the nature-based solution to be self-sustaining over time, and that it has that positive impact on local communities and their livelihoods. Criterion 5 is on inclusive governance, which might be the most appropriate for this discussion, talking about local communities and their work on nature-based solutions. So inclusive governance is all about identifying the people who are affected by the nature-based solution, ensuring that we're listening to their problems, we're addressing the problems that they say are existing, and we're doing it in a way that respects their rights and their local governance that's already in place. So not disrupting that, but adding to it and helping them to ensure that we have this long-term support for the nature-based solution. Criteria 6 is on balancing trade-offs. So nature-based solutions often take longer than traditional gray infrastructure to be effective. When we think about if we're going to stop flooding, maybe you would, if you went with gray infrastructure, you would reinforce a bank with concrete, which happens very quickly and can be effective, but of course requires high maintenance costs over time. If instead we developed a riparian buffer and we planted trees along the banks of the river, that might take longer and it might have impacts on people until it is effective. So how do we ensure that the people are not being negatively affected or they're being compensated while we wait for the nature-based solution to become effective? Criterion 7 is on adaptive management. So ensuring that we're monitoring the project and seeing how it's working or not working and going back and revising the project to make sure we're accomplishing our goals. And criterion 8 is on mainstreaming and sustainability. So making sure we're influencing policy, we're talking with the right people at government to grow and to be able to scale up this nature-based solution if it is effective. So that's a brief overview, but if you're interested in learning more, I recommend you to go and have a look for the global standard. There's a lot of information about it. And I just wanted to show you briefly what it looks like. So nature-based solutions standard has three main components. So first is a booklet, the standard itself, which describes the 8 criteria and the indicators associated with them. And then there's also a background document that really explains how the criteria were developed and why and what the scientific guidance is on that and how you can verify your results and suggested means of verification for this. And the third part is an Excel sheet with the 8 criteria and the indicators. And what you can do if you have a nature-based solution in mind is you can self-assess your nature-based solution. You can go through each of the indicators here, and you can say whether you've strongly met, partially met, adequately met, or not met at all, each of the indicators. And what you get at the end is this spider web that shows you where your intervention is very strong. So for example, this spider web on the right, you can see is very strong. It's 100% on societal challenges, but it's quite weak on Criterion 4 on economic feasibility. So once you've completed this standard self-assessment, you can go back with your team and look at how you can strengthen the economic feasibility of your intervention to make it stronger. So an interesting tool, I encourage you to look at it if you're planning nature-based solutions or if you want to learn more. It's a really exciting way that we're trying to be able to benchmark and define nature-based solutions more clearly. And finally, I just wanted to add that nature-based solutions for wetlands in particular are really becoming kind of an interesting topic on the world stage. So during the last Ramsar COP, there was a discussion on how we can finance wetlands conservation and ensure that we're providing these climate benefits for people and communities. And there's also a huge need to scale up this financing for nature-based solutions in wetlands. We agree nature-based solutions can often be expensive at the beginning, but often if you look at their cost over time, they're much cheaper than gray solutions. So there's a lot of discussion on how we can do that. Our colleagues at Wetlands International Japan also talked a lot about nature-based solutions in wetlands for disaster risk reduction, which is another quite common topic when we talk about nature-based solutions in wetlands specifically. And just to add that there is a lot of increasing in funding for nature-based solutions. So big donors like the Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund are really starting to recognize the importance of nature-based solutions and direct their money and direct their calls for proposals towards this. So there's a lot of momentum here, and I think there's a lot of potential for nature-based solutions in the future. So that's it for me. I understand the questions will come after the next presentation, but I welcome anything in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie, for the excellent presentation. Well, it was a very comprehensive presentation, and I believe that our participants also found it very, very informative, and then it was a good educational sessions. So Katie talked about the definition of the nature-based solutions and also a few examples in Thailand, how the nature-based solutions are actually applied in our reality, and what are the differences with other similar environmental interventions, and how we can verify if it's nature-based solutions or not using this globally approved standards. I think it's excellent learning for everyone here. So for those of you, if you have any questions for Katie, please feel free to leave your question in the chat box, and then we will collect them and address the question after the second speaker's presentation. So yep. Okay, so let's move to our second speaker. Now, I would like to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Jiefeng Jin, also one of our partner, ICF. So let me introduce our second speaker. Mr. Jiefeng Jin is Yangtze Basin Program Manager of the International Crane Foundation, ICF, based in China. He started his conservation career in 2009 and joined ICF in 2014. To conserve the critically endangered species Siberian crane and other 3 crane species, as well as their wetland habitats, he maintains and develops good relationship with various partners, donors, and other stakeholders, designs implements ICF conservation strategies in wintering area of Yangtze River Basin, particularly in Poyang Lake, where over 98% of the world population of Siberian crane, together with almost all of the Western population of white-naped crane, are wintering. He works closely with national and international research institutes to advise on management actions for protecting cranes and other waterbirds. He is committed to promoting the public awareness and engagement, such as recruiting and training volunteers from local communities and colleges to carry out education and outreach for the public. He has a deep interest in working with the local communities to safeguard their resources base while restoring landscape important to cranes. He has obtained his second master's degree in environmental conservation at University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2020. Mr. Jiefeng will present about the engaging local community in crane conservation in China. Again, please leave your question in the chat box and we will address your question after Jiefeng's presentation is finished. Please welcome Jiefeng Jin. Jiefeng, the floor is yours. Jiefeng, would you please unmute yourself?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jin Jiefeng. I'm the Yangtze River Program Manager at the International Crane Foundation. I'm based in China, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to talk about the community engagement in crane conservation at the Yangtze River, China. Firstly, I'd like to make a very brief introduction on my organization. The headquarters of the International Crane Foundation is in America. Its mission is to conserve all 15 crane species in the world and the wetland ecosystem they rely on. ICF started their work in China since 1979, and now we have 3 programs. First one is the Northeast China program, focused on the stopover and the breeding area in Northeast China. The second one is the black-necked crane program. We are working in the southwest China to protect these species. And the last one is the Yangtze and the Poyang Basin program. We focus on 4 crane species and their wintering ground. Yangtze River is the longest river in China, and the bottom left map shows where is the Yangtze River basin, and the Poyang Lake. Poyang Lake is the largest freshwater in China, and right now it is one of the last 2 lakes connected with the Yangtze River naturally. The right map shows the landscape of the Poyang Lake Basin. Okay, every year we can see about 70 species of waterbird wintering at the Poyang Lake Basin, and the total number of the waterbirds can reach 500,000 in average. So why Poyang Lake can attract so many migratory birds? That's because the Poyang Lake is a very dynamic ecosystem. The water level in summer can reach 22 meters, and in the dry season, the water level can go than 8 meters. You can see the right photo. There are many separated water area formed in the dry season. We call these areas the summer lakes, and the summer lakes are the major wintering habitat for cranes and other waterbird species. So normally in Poyang Lake Basin, we can see 4 crane species. The Siberian crane species, one-nape crane, and the hooded crane, and the Eurasian crane. These 4 species were very easy to see at Poyang Lake. Almost all of the world's Siberian crane and the entire western population of the one-nape crane are wintering in the Poyang Lake. And normally they are spent 4 to 5 months at Poyang Lake each winter. Last winter, we counted about 42 Siberian cranes, 4,200 Siberian cranes, and 700 one-nape cranes in Poyang. So how is the situation for crane conservation at a wintering area? What's the threats to them, and what measures we can take to protect the crane species? So to make a practical conservation planning, we applied the conservation standards. Conservation standard is a very helpful tool that is adopted by the conservation community internationally. So through the situation analysis, we identified the direct threats and the indirect threats to resolve the priority threats to cranes. So here, this diagram for the situation analysis is too complicated. I'm not going to introduce in detail, but I just like to show you that we identified the direct threats. They are listed in the pink boxes, and we also identified the indirect threats. They are in the orange boxes. So yeah, to resolve these threats to the cranes, we developed many strategies. So the community awareness is one of the strategies we are strategies that we are implementing in the wintering area, China. For the strategy community awareness, we developed the theory of change. This is the best assumption that we can reach the goals we set up if we take the actions step by step. Under these strategies, we proposed many activities. You can see these activities are listed in the yellow boxes here. So 2 components we think are very important. The first one is how to improve the awareness of the community, of the local community, including to improve their knowledge on the waterbirds and the wetland, and how to change the attitude. And another one is how to get the local farmers or fishermen to involve in the conservation and how to separate they can get benefit from the conservation practice. So considering the unique natural resource, including migratory waterbirds and the wetland landscape, and then combining the actual needs we've collected from the socio-economic survey, we think helping the local to develop the ecotourism based on the wetland and waterbird conservation is a good approach. So here are some photos to show what we did on the strategy of community awareness. recent years. So these photos show that we are talking with the local governments, villager leaders, and farmers. Actually, we met different stakeholders very frequently. Nearly we met every month. We always told them something like that. If you preserve cranes and waterbirds around you, and the visitors can be attracted here, and then you will obtain the opportunities and economic development. And we provide study tour to the local officials, village leaders, and local farmers, so they can learn the best practice from the other communities in China. For the women who would like to be working as bird watching guides, we provide diverse trainings to them. We not only provide indoor training, but also provide the field training. The indoor training includes like the regulation about the wildlife conservation and the basic knowledge on the cranes, waterbirds, and wetland. So the local women, they have a good background on the biology. So when they working as a bird watching guide, so they can teach the visitors about the cranes and the waterbirds, and can tell the visitors well what they can do in here and what they can't do here. So yeah, here you can see we provide the field training to the local tour guides. Here, like the ISF, the president and two vice president, and teach how the local tour guide how to use the binoculars and telescope. And we also made some pictures about the cranes and waterbirds and the wetlands landscape of Poyang Lake. We presented these photos to the local tour guide, and we also made some education materials and give to the local tour guide, so they can distribute to the visitors. Yeah, to the trained tour guide, if they hope to do the business on the homestay, we also present some like the planes and the boards to them, so they can use them for the business. And you can for all of the planes and boards, we printed the slogan about crane and wetland conservation, yeah, on the planes and on the board. So the visitors, yeah, when they're eating, they can see the slogans. Yeah, we also set up a community education center. Yeah, in December 16, we decorate an old house. This old house is provided by a local farmer to us to use for 5 years for free. So since that time, we start to to decorate this old house. You can see that time the inside and the outside of this old house is very poor. And after 2 years decoration, the education, the new education was complete. So you can see the outside is looks nice, and we organized many education activities here. So this picture you can see we organized the winter camp there. This is the inside of the community education center. You can see there are many elements of cranes and wetlands. This place is welcomed by the local villagers and also the visitors, so they can learn a lot from this place. And in some villages, we also made some wall paintings about the cranes and its habitat. Yeah, so yeah, this place is a wonderful place for visitors. Yeah, they take photos. Yeah, there. So at last, I'd like to talk about the outcomes and the benefit. The first one is based on our assessment. There are about 15 women and families engaged the ecotourism, and since the year 2016, some people working as a tour guide, and some people doing well in the business of homestay. So accordingly, their income improved a lot. So the second outcome is the disturbance event caused by the visitors reduced adversely. In comparing with the baseline we collected in 2016, and the disturbance event reduced 20% in the end of 2021. And the third one is the conflict between nature reserve and the local community mitigated. More and more local farmers or fishermen, they realize the importance of the conservation, and they know there are more opportunities coming from the waterbirds conservation. So at last, under the local government, they also realize the importance, the crane and the wetland conservation. So they started the construction of the migratory birds town construction in 2019. It is a development plan based on the waterbird and the wetland conservation. So since that time, many facilities like the parking lot, the public toilet, and the bird watching towers or bird watching platform were built. So the experience for the visitors improved a lot, and at the same time, the visitor management was more effective. Many farmers or fishermen were hired to work as the rangers to protect the cranes and other species there. So all these things would promote the development of the local communities. So yeah, so we think what we are trying to do at the Poyang Lake, yeah, is a good approach to conserve the cranes under their habitat, and at the same time, we are purchase the local community development. So that's all I'd like to share today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jiefeng. It was an excellent presentation. So we learned about different species in Poyang Lake and also the methodologies like a situation analysis, theory of change, and of course, the various approaches to outreach local community to open their mind and also to change their behavior and also open the dialogues with the different stakeholders. That was a very, very practical, I think, lessons for all of us. So now I think we can open a Q&A session. So we have received a few questions for the speakers today. And first question was for Katie. So what is the biggest obstacle when we combine the nature-based solutions with great infrastructure, and how to tackle it? Katie?
Thanks. I think that's a great question. I think first, the biggest obstacle is getting governments to buy into this idea. I think so often governments are resistant to the idea of nature-based solutions because, especially in Asia, they have this mindset that development should be more concrete, it should be more infrastructure. But when we look at what Europe and what the United States are doing is right now they're realizing the importance of nature-based solutions, and they're starting to take down all of the infrastructure that they invested in 20 or 30 years ago and starting to do these things like reconnecting wetlands to help with flood mitigation. So I think one of the key obstacles in Asia is getting the governments to not make the same mistakes that the governments in Europe and the US did, and instead having them move to nature-based solutions while skipping this gray infrastructure idea at the beginning. But then once you do have the buy-in for these hybrid solutions, I think there's still not enough case studies, there's not enough examples we can point to. So there is, of course, this element of uncertainty that we just need to build up the evidence base a bit more. The example I provided on wastewater treatment, that's quite a good one that people understand quite thoroughly, but we need to figure out where the rest of these synergies are and understand them so that we can present them to governments and present them to the private sector and other investors as feasible, well understood hybrid approaches. But really good question. Yeah, I think more case studies and more examples are definitely needed.
Yes, we need more case studies and also scientifically verified evidence for people to understand. Well, there is another question for Katie. So after this, I will raise a question to Jiefeng. So Katie, there might be some conflicts over resources in establishing nature-based solutions, especially over land, access to go to the park and forest resources. How do you figure out these conflicts? For example, in crabberry case, what is your challenges?
Yeah, definitely. Access is always a difficult thing, right? If you tell people they can't access natural resources, I think initially people will resist it. But again, we need this case study. We need these examples of, okay, so we're going to restrict your access to this fishery for 3 or 4 years so that we can, recover the fishery a bit. And you'll start to see the benefits. But of course, low-income communities can't wait that long. So that's why this Criterion 6 on establishing trade-offs in the nature-based solution standard is really important. We need to find ways to compensate those people while we restrict access to the resource, in this case, fisheries or forests, for example. And we need to make sure that they're happy with the compensation so that they abide by the regulations that have been put in place and that they were involved in developing the regulations so that they feel like it's fair. So it's all about ensuring that it's just and ensuring that it's fair and that the stakeholders really do have this buy-in. I think in Cruppery Estuary, the biggest challenge we faced is that it's a really large site. So in terms of governance, we have the national parks, we have the Department of Marine and Coastal Resources, we have the Department of Water Resources. We have many different governments in charge of specific areas of the site, but there's no overseeing umbrella organization for the whole Ramsar site. So that's something we're starting to develop with stakeholders from each group to develop a Ramsar management committee that can meet and talk about changes in the ecosystem or plans for the system from all of their different point of views, because they all have a lot of knowledge, but there's no place for them to come together and share that knowledge.
All right, thank you. Hope that answers the questions well. A question for Jiefeng. So thank you. It is impressive that ICF is working for the conservation of cranes in several ways with various stakeholders. I wonder if ICF has any cooperative projects with private sector or companies in China that want to support the conservation of cranes and their habitats. Would you please share the experience or any plan for it? So yeah, question is about the private sector cooperation. Jiefeng?
Yes, we actually our Siberian crane conservation project was supported by many companies like not companies. I think is the company like for example the Disney Conservation Fund. That's from the Disney, yeah, the headquarters. And we start this project in 2015, and we achieved a lot of outcomes. And the community awareness, this strategy is one of the strategy we implement. We also implement other strategies like the applied research and crane habitat management, especially focus on the summer lakes, the natural habitat for cranes. So all of the strategies are supported by the Disney Conservation Fund. Yeah, we also get many supports from other organizations or the some companies from America. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That's a good answer. This question goes to both speakers, so I will address it to both. So this question, do you have any advice on what can we do as youth to effectively engage the government to support these types of programs? So it's very practical question, what youth can do. Yes. Maybe, Katie, would you like to answer first?
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Youth are really important and they have a very strong voice when it comes to influencing governments. I think one of the key things that youth can do better than the rest of the population is to use their voice and to use social media to advocate for causes that are important to them. I think something we as IUCN and many other organizations haven't quite figured out is how to effectively communicate our ideas through the internet and through social media. And this is something that youth are incredible at. And I think the more attention you raise for an issue, even if maybe even you're too young to vote in your country, the more you can put the spotlight on that, the better. And it really has a huge impact in influencing policy and influencing the ideas or the thought process around these topics.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Katie. So may I invite Jiefeng? What would be your advice for youth to engage the government or local community?
Yes. As I introduced in my presentation, I think the provide the opportunity about the study tour is very important, very helpful. I think when we implement the conservation project at the Yangtze River Basin, we invite some officials from government to have a tour start. Firstly, we invite them to see what we have done in China. I mean, SF has done in China, and to see the achievement, and also we invite them to other place, like the Mongolia and the US to see the best practice. Yeah, and another aspect I think is provide trainings to the local governments. We can organize trainings about the wetland conservation or the migratory bird conservation to the official, because they lack the background about this.
Yes, thank you. So more questions are coming in. So this is another question for Jiefeng. Thank you, Jiefeng, for your great presentation. I have a question for you. Are there any fishermen in Poyang Lake after the fishing ban in the Yangtze River? Is there any promotion strategy for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, to protect the fishery resource, the China government and the local government decide to implement 10 years fishing ban policy. So at Poyang Lake, the fishermen, they're because of the fishing ban, so they need to find another adaptive work. Like they need to move to find job in cities. And the government made compensations to these fishermen who are lost their traditional work. For example, they were help find job for them and gave related trainings to these fishermen. And the government also arranged their children study in the schools in the city. Yeah, that's all I like to say. Yeah, but the fishing ban also cause other problems to the crane and the waterbird conservation. Here I'm not to explain too much, but I like to say like some of the crayfish. Crayfish is a invasive species. Because of the fishing ban, no fisherman can catch crayfish. So the crayfish may eat all of the aquatic submerged aquatic plants. This is the major food to cranes and other species like dangerous one. So we think we need to take measures to control the population of crayfish after the fishing ban.
You're muted.
Yes, sorry. So yes, thank you. We have two more questions that came in for Jiefeng. So after these two questions, I think we can have a group photo and then finish the webinar for the time limitations. So Jiefeng, what kind of opportunities and incentives have you mainly created to engage local people in the conservation? Sometimes many locals might be busy and full of work with their daily livelihood matters. How did you manage it on ground?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I'm not fully catch the question. Can you speak slowly? Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
For that.
Oh, no problem. Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's asking what kind of opportunities and incentives for local community to engage, because they are just very busy with their daily lives. So how did you manage it in practice? People may not be interested in talking with you or raising awareness sometimes just off their topic. So how do you give incentives to the local?
Okay. Actually, in winter time, the villagers don't have too much things to do. They harvest the crops in autumn. So in the winter, I think their time enough. So if they have opportunity to earn more money, I think they are happy to involve. So when we talk with them, we can provide trainings to you to to be working as a tour guide or support you to do the business on the homestay, they are happy to join our team and get the trainings on that.
All right. Thank you, Jiefeng. And this question, I think you can go to Katie. Are there any publicly available repositories or databases for evidence around nature-based solutions?
Yeah, so I wasn't sure if we'd get to this, so I've just put it in the chat also. But the Panorama platform is a really interesting repository of case studies, and anyone can submit a case study on their work. It's not exclusively nature-based solutions, although I believe there are some being developed specific, like other platforms specifically for nature-based solutions. But have a look at the Panorama. You can search by ecosystem, you can search by region, and you can find a lot of really detailed case studies of work that is often nature-based solutions, especially in wetlands.
Great, thank you. Yes, so the Panorama website is just indicated in the chat box. So for those who are interested, please click the link and you can access. All right, and Jiefeng, maybe this can be a last question for you. Could you tell us the methods and strategies that you use to persuade the local government to join ICF program? Because in here, Java, there is a quite hard to convince the government to join our program.
Yeah, that's really a great question. Christian. You know, ICF started their work at China since 1979. It's a long period here. I think working with the government is not easy, but I think the first step is to build the how to say the trust first. You know, we can start with the either things. Both parties can do. I think for me, you know, I always need to talk with some new people from the government, and we need to not talk about the things directly. You need to think about other ways to, like, for example, to make friends firstly, and then one time after 1 or 2 times, and then how to say, you know, we need to build the trust gradually, not one time. We need to invest our time on that. Yeah, that's.
Yes, definitely.
It's really a great question. Yeah.
This is a good question. I think it's a building relationship and then trust with any stakeholders, not just government. So excellent answer. All right, so we are coming to an end. So for those who have still a question for the speakers, feel free to leave your question in chat box. We'll collect and then share with our speakers for future reference. So thank you so much once again to our speakers, Ms. Kathryn Bimson and Mr. Jiefeng Jin. We hope everyone learned a lot from this webinar, and we are going to upload an edited video to our EAAFP YouTube channel after this webinar. And before we close, I would like to invite all of you to take a group photo. So please turn on your video. We are going to take a group photo. Yes, now I can see everyone's smiley face. Yes, okay, so we are gonna take a few group photos because we have almost like 30 people. So I'll count. Okay, please turn on your video. I can see everyone. Yes, great. Okay, few more people. Let me see. All right, so let's take a photo. So on count of 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so okay, smile again. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. Yes. So coming next, there will be 2 other training workshops, one in early August this year about project management, and one in early September about conservation communication and storytelling. So hopefully you can also find it on our website and then join the next 2 training workshops. And we will invite more experienced speakers and trainers for the youth. So please follow EAAFP social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and stay tuned with us. Thank you for all your participation today, and have a good evening or good afternoon, and hope to see you again. Thank you, everyone. Bye.